welcome. Can everybody hear me? Give me a thumbs up. Can you hear me? I think it's working. All right, so we are on week 4 of our 24-week Bible study intensive. And this week we are on Genesis 12 through 50. And this is a lot. This is a lot of information. And so basically, when you are just trying to go through the Bible in 24 weeks, you are having to just compact it all together. And it's super hard to just get it all in there because you can't. And so I'm not going to be able to go verse by verse because that would take forever. But I encourage you to do that because I've done that in my Bible. Let me show you mine. Let me show you Genesis for all you people that love look. My Bible is Genesis is just completely just covered. So I encourage you to do that. Do it because it's fun. It takes a while, because there's a lot of chapters in Genesis and to go verse by verse and just a deep dive. It's a lot of stuff. So we are on YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook Live. I understand it is Father's Day weekend. If you are unable to stay on the live, totally fine. There's grace, all of that. Do what you want to do. You can come back. You can watch the replay later during the week or whatever. I'm on multiple cameras right now, so if I'm not looking directly at you, like I say every week, I'll honor you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining in. Love you all. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay? So Genesis 12 through 50. This is week 4. Like I said, week 4, Genesis 12 through 50. So the first half of the book of Genesis focuses on creation of everything, like how humanity was made, how time itself was orchestrated, lights, all of that. And then we kind of spiral downward into self-destruction, and we go from creation to the Tower of Babel. So the Tower of Babel is where we ended last week. And so the second half of the book focuses on one family. It goes down and it just zooms in and it's the life and works of Abraham and his descendants. And it starts with a man named Abram, not Abraham, who we eventually know becomes Abraham, and then ends with the 12 sons of Jacob. So tonight, just sit back. You ain't even got to look at me. You ain't got to look at the screen. You can just listen, absorb, walk around your house, do whatever you're doing. Because we are going to hear a story. And we're going to start with Abram. And we're going to end with the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay? So we pick up after the Tower of Babel. The people have scattered out, and the Bible comes in and focuses on one guy named Abram. And we will eventually know him as Abraham. So I'm going to actually take you to a slide. If you're TikTok and the other screens, I'm sorry you cannot see this slide. I'm sorry. So, Abraham was born in the city of Ur of the Chaldees. Chaldes. You can see down there in the bottom corner where it says the Persian Gulf. Ur is right in there. Okay, it was an important and wealthy Sumerian city-state in ancient Mesopotamia. The father of Abraham, his name is Terah. I'm just going to say it like that. I'm not sure of the correct pronunciation. I'm just going to say Terah. His father was 130 years old at his birth, and his family also included older brothers Haran and Nahor. Abram was the firstborn in the family, but he is listed before his two older brothers in Genesis 11. This could be because he would be the heir of God's promises instead of his brothers. So I'm just going to leave this screen up. Examine it. Look at it. Because I did not do this. And I do not know the person who made this. I found it on Google. And so thank you, person who pioneered this before and literally drew this out and labeled this map. So Joshua 24, 2-3 says, Joshua said to all the people, Thus says the Lord God of Israel, your fathers, including Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, dwelt on the other side of the river, and that would be the Euphrates River, in old times, and they served other gods. Then I took your father Abraham from the other side of the river, from the Euphrates, led him throughout all the land of Canaan, and multiplied his seed, his descendants, and gave him Isaac. So Abraham lived in Ur, in the bottom part of that map, and he lived there for 70 years. 70 years. And he accompanied his father and the entire family to the city of Haran. So if the map, you can see the little line. It goes all the way up to Haran. Other screens, I apologize, you do not have the map. So he travels, Terah, he accompanies father and the entire family to the city of Haran. And sometime before the traveling, his brother Haran, who is the father of Lot, actually dies. And he does not travel with them to the next city. So after living in Haran for 5 years, Terah, Abram's father, passes away at the age of 205 years old. So chapter 12 starts with God instructing Abraham to leave his country, his relatives, and his father's house to head toward Canaan. So you can just examine that. Canaan is over there in the green. Okay, that's a long ways, right? It's a long ways to go. So we see God come in the beginning, and he starts making a lot of promises to Abraham. He says, I will make of thee a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. You shall be a blessing. I will bless those who curse you. I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So when the Lord spoke to Abram about leaving, in Acts 7, it is actually revealed through Stephen that this promise was made to Abram when he was still in Mesopotamia. This was before he actually dwelt in Haran, okay? So Genesis 12, 1-3 is actually repeating a promise that God had already spoken to Abram. Since his father was now dead in Haran, Abram was more compelled to then be more in obedience and more willing to travel into Canaan. So since we know that God had previously told Abram to leave, was Abram and his family stopping at Haran disobedient? Was that a disobedience stopping there? Because, should he have kept traveling? Was he being disobedient to remain in the city until his father passed? Either way, if this was a way, we'll just say like if it was a partial disobedience, his partial obedience did not take God's promise away. And so, but it was 100% delaying it. And until he was ready to actually do what the Lord told him to do, it was going to be delayed, the promise. So when you're reading Genesis 12-50, you will see that everything is built off of these verses of God making Abram a great nation. So right now, Abram is 75 years old. He departed as the Lord told him with his wife Sarai, and he allows his nephew Lot to accompany him. The Lord tells him to actually leave all his relatives behind, and Lot comes with him. And he should have left Lot, because later on in it, Lot becomes a distraction to Abram later on. He should have left him at home. Lot, stay at home. So fun fact, side, as they're traveling to get to Canaan, we see Abram, he builds altars along the way. Like there's one he stops and build, and then Abram, the second place that he stops and build an altar altar is in a place called Bethel, which is a Hebrew name for house of God. And Abram's descendants would continually revisit the area of Bethel as a reminder of the covenant that God had made with their father Abraham. And this is also the place where Jacob had his famous Jacob's ladder dream. So it's a little cool story of how they all traveled through the same space. So when they arrived in the land of Canaan, there was a famine. So him and his household journeyed to Egypt before coming back and settling in Canaan. So you can see they were all the way up at Haran at the very top of the map, in the top of the little triangle. Then the green little area is Canaan. So there was a famine. And so him and his household had to journey to Egypt. So Egypt is all the way on the bottom left. They had traveled down there, deal with the famine, before coming back and actually settling into Canaan. Okay, so apparently we learn in here that Sarah was very beautiful. And Abram was very fearful that the Egyptians would see her and be attracted to his wife. So here he has her to lie. Come on, Abram. So he's like, listen, like I said, you're going to get Crystal Thomas story mode tonight. All right. So he comes in. He's like, look, I don't know if he tells Sarah he's scared, but he said, I need you to lie. I need you to tell them that you're my sister. And so I don't want to die because of you. Basically, I don't want to die because the king's going to come in and see you and be like, you're hot and I want you as mine. And, so just say that you're my sister. So actually, this is kind of like a half truth, because later we learn that Sarai, in fact, is his half sister, but he's still being deceitful. So the Egyptians believe the lie, and she's taken into Pharaoh's house. And Abram is rewarded with great gifts for the right for this dude to pursue his wife. So we see God come in and plague Pharaoh in his house because of Sarah. The Lord's like, no. So Pharaoh calls Abram. He's like, dude, what is up? I'm getting bombarded with plagues because of your lie. I need you to come clean. And so Abram comes clean. Well, yeah, she's my wife. So Pharaoh is upset, obviously, like anybody else would be. And he's like, why did you tell me that she's your sister? I might have taken her to be my wife. I might have slept with her. Why would you lie to me? And so then he sends him, then the Pharaoh ends up sending him away. He is like, take all your stuff, get out of here, leave. Okay. So ultimately, God had to come in and save Sarai from being defiled by another man, because we see Abram listen, I just need you to lie because I'm scared. All right. So after leaving Egypt, and they head back to where he had originally set up an altar. By this time, Abraham and Lot were super wealthy. They had silver, they had cattle, they had gold. They had become so prosperous that they needed to separate. It was just the herdsmen of Abraham and the herdsmen of Lot were just butting heads, and it wasn't happening. It wasn't working out. It wasn't civil. It wasn't peaceful. And they said, let us just have no strife between each other, and let's just separate. Let's just do that, because it's not working out this way. So obviously the blessing that the Lord had promised to Abram was already in effect, because they were already had abundance. So Abram, after this, he's like, let's just separate. Let's just do it that way, so that we have no strife between us. Abraham says, I'll let you, Lot, you can pick your own part of the land where you want to go to. Boom, done, settled. Chapter 14 comes in. It's the Battle of 9 Kings. The battle really wouldn't have a storyline to us, except you remember Lot. the dude who should have stayed at home. Well, he is now separated from Abraham, and he lives in this little land called Sodom. And when this place gets attacked during the battle, Lot was taken. He's a prisoner of war. And some man escapes and gets word back to Abraham, or Abram, and about his nephew. Like, he is, like, I can see this dude showing up. He was in a prison camp, probably. Hey, I'm coming to you. Lot told me about you. He's in prison. You gotta ride out and go get him. So Abram, he rides out to go get him, to go get Lot. Now this is a war, okay? Like, there's the Battle of 9 Kings, okay? And so Abram takes 318 trained men and just goes in and just tore up these dudes on the battlefield. And you have to remember that he defeated 5 kings. Like, these 4 kings, he defeated 4 kings. The 4 kings that Abram just defeated with his 318 men, his own little strong army, because that's how loaded he was. They just defeated 5 kings. So how does 318 men defeat a whole army of 4 kings when that whole army of 4 kings just beat a whole army of 5 kings? Because we know who was behind those 318 men, right? And his name was God. God was coming in hot, taking care of business for Abram, because he was the promise. The birth of the nation would come through him. So you gotta imagine, you have a 75-year-old man traveling 125 miles to war, and he shows up and shows out. That's pretty awesome. So on the way back, at the base of Mount Moriah, later, this place is called Jerusalem, they meet a very famous person named Melchizedek, and he is the king of Salem. Melchizedek is a side teaching that I will get into later, because I cannot deep dive into the parallels of who this person is right now, because we're in our 24-week Bible study, and we're on week 4 right now, and I'm trying to stay focused and get you all the foundational information you would need to understand the foundation of the Bible by the week 24. Okay. So by this time, we're about in chapter 15 of Genesis. So this chapter comes in and elaborates God's unconditional covenant with Abram. Okay, God speaks to Abram in a vision, telling Abram his seed will be like the dust and the stars. The dust represents the earthly substance, and the stars represent the heavenly substance. So God was saying, you're going to be covered. Imagine how many stars there are. Look at the dust. You're going to have a lot. I got you. So God comes in again, reinstating his promise to him. And reinstates his promise to give the land to Abram's descendants. So Abram sees no way for this to happen. So he asks God. He talks to God. He communicates with God. There's a dialogue back and forth. So he asked God, he said, I need some form of assurance. And God's like, God does it. God gives him the assurance. So it may sound strange to us, but it is actually common of what happens here and what takes place. So it was common between 2 parties to solemnize an agreement by something called cutting a covenant. Okay? So the 2 parties would cut animals in half, and they would form like a corridor. Then they would walk through the animals halves together, and kind of like a figure 8, kind of like the infinity, what we know as the infinity. And they would each recite their part of this contract. Okay? And so they would conclude, they would conclude by calling on the gods to do to them what they had done to these animals if they didn't keep their promise. But we see God deviate from this normal custom process that these people used to do. So Abraham comes. He did what the Lord asked. The Lord asked him to go get specific animals and a specific amount. Abram does. He gets them, he cuts them, and then he's waiting. And you know what? God did not show up right away. That'll preach in itself, wouldn't it? God, hey, I need you to do this. You do it. You're waiting on God to do his other part, and he doesn't come right away. And then we see vultures coming in, and the vultures are trying to like eat the carcasses that Abram just cut in two, and that can represent the enemy coming in and trying to steal our blessing and trying to steal what is God's from us. I just like that parallel there. So here's where we see, we're usually in the cutting of the covenant where it's the two people joined doing it together. Here's where we see where God does it differently. Adam is in this deep sleep. And the same term for Adam. Abram goes into this deep sleep, and the same term that used for the deep sleep that Abram is now in is the same term used of Adam when a rib was taken from his side in Genesis 2. And so then God, in the form of a fire, a smoking furnace, went through the covenant procedure by himself. He did that while he came to him in his sleep, in a dream, in the vision state of dream. So the two of them did not go through it together. God went alone. God announces the main sequence of events that will precede his descendants. And the point is, the covenant was unconditional and unilateral to Abraham's benefit. God made an oath and a promise, and it could not be broken. And it still stands. So God committed the land to Abram and his descendants. The land committed to Abram and his descendants was from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates. And he was told, and the Lord even told him, that his descendants would be in slavery and oppressed in a different land for 400 years. Okay? So this was a prophecy from God. But as always, the enemy's always looking over the shoulder, always listening, always trying to figure out what the next thing is, taking notes, sending out his little minions. So he's keeping track of every prophetic word that's spoken in the atmosphere. And he knew, all right, I got a 400-year interval. So here he comes again. He populates the land with the Nephilim, and they were intended to be a barrier, because we will read later in Joshua that he was told to wipe out every man and every child of a certain tribe. And that can seem very disheartening to us, because you're just like, every man, every woman, every child. But because something was manipulated, and it was their DNA. And as we talked last week, and we explained that just a little bit. So God promised Abram a land and a son when he was 75 years old. But now it's 10 years have passed, and without the birth of his promised son. So in chapter 16, we see Abram come in and try to rectify the problem by himself. And if you try to do something by yourself without God, you think you can do it better, it's not going to go so well. Right? And so Sarah was barren. That means she couldn't have a kid. So Sarah's old too, but the Lord's still speaking a promise. So the procedure in those days was to let the handmaid be a surrogate and to bear the children for the head of the household. So Sarai at this point initiates the Egyptian handmaid to have sex with her husband Abram, and then she gives birth to Ishmael, the handmaid. So we see the parallel. Instead of two trees being the issue in the beginning of Genesis, now in Genesis we actually see that the issue is between two women. TikTok, if you're shaking, I am so sorry, because I have that in the floor and it is still going back and forth. So the issue is here is the two women. I'm sorry. So the idea to do this was brought to Abram by Sarai. And Abraham fell into it and agreed, just like Adam did when Eve ate the fruit. She hands it to her husband. He eats it. He didn't stop it. And neither did Abram, and he disagrees to it. So Hagar is her name, the handmaid. And after Hagar becomes pregnant, dissension arises between her and Sarai. Of course, because polygamy is wrong, and it's going to bring in confusion, deceit. It's going to bring in all kind of dissension and all that, jealousy. So, and Sarah forces Hagar out of the tent and into the wilderness, where God visits her. He visits Hagar and tells her to submit to Sarai. And Ishmael is born to Hagar 1 year. Let me see here. Let me backtrack. So Ishmael is born to Hagar 1 year later. Abraham is now 86 years old. Okay. So when all of that was happening, there was jealousy, dissension, all of that. So I wanted you to get a time frame. Abraham's now 86. Okay. And Hagar is about 1 year old. So God is the one that tells Hagar to name her son Ishmael, and reveals that he will be a wild man, and his hand will be against every man. And the Hebrew word for wild here alludes to a wild donkey. And wild donkeys live in the wilderness and are difficult to tame. So the idea that Ishmael would dwell in the wilderness and fight continually with his hands against every man was the parallel of that. And so when you see that, you kind of see that like it's not fair, but this is why it's important that we follow what God tells us to do, and we don't try to take matters into our own hands, because we're just going to make the situation worse. So, moving on. 13 years passed between Genesis 16 and Genesis 17, and God reveals his new name to Abram here as Almighty God, which in Hebrew means El Shaddai. And God also comes in and changes Abram's name to Abraham, and confirms again his covenant to Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, and not just the Jewish people, of many nations. And God also comes in and changes Sarai's name to Sarah, and he promised Abraham's son, and he was thinking, okay, I got Ishmael. But God said, no, in a year, Sarah herself will bear you a son. So, when God changed their names, he added a specific syllable, a specific word into it. So this is from Perry Stone. It says, the sacred name of God, which is called the Tetragrammaton, is spelled with 4 Hebrew letters, Yod, He, Vav, and He. When God changes Abram's name to Abraham, he inserts the Hebrew letter He, H-E-I, from his divine name into Abram's name. He is the 5th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and the biblical number 5 represents grace. The letter He also has a strong breathing sound, representing the sound of life. When it is pronounced, God also changes Sarai's name to Sarah, inserting the second He of his sacred name into Sarah's name. Thus, after God inserts the 2 letters of his divine name, one into Abraham's name and the other into Sarah's, God gives new life to Sarah and Abraham, making them fruitful and giving them their son of promise. That's pretty awesome. So then God, the circumcision is a sign of his special covenant, and this comes in this chapter. And descendants of Abraham, not just Jews, are circumcised because of that. And circumcision was performed either with a sharp knife or a stone. So circumcision began in the 17th chapter of Genesis with Abraham, and he is 99 years old. Fun fact, science fact, side note, God initiated that the circumcision should be on the 8th day. Scientifically speaking, clotting agents are not optimized until then. Vitamin K is not formed until the 5th through the 7th day. So the 8th is the first safe day. Second, prothrombin, which facilitates clotting, is below normal until the 8th day, when it peaks to 110% of normal for a day or so and then drops back to its normal value. So it kind of looks like God knew what he was doing, right? So Genesis 18 starts with God visiting Abraham. Abraham is visited by 3 men, the Lord himself, and 2 angelic messengers. Throughout the Old Testament, angels would appear in the form of men at time. And Sarah's eavesdropping on the conversation, or she's in the kitchen cooking the meals for these angels. And she happens to overhear that and then she starts laughing because the Lord is saying Sarah is going to have a baby. And she's laughing because she's like, I'm 90 years old. But then she gets scolded for laughing. And for a moment, because the Lord's like, you're not going to mock. I'm telling the truth. This is nothing to be laughing at. I'm telling you, you're going to have a baby. So, and they also indicated and let them know that the men did, that they're just stopping by for a moment. Just swing by. Let me just stop by Abraham and Sarah's tent just for a moment as we head out on our other adventure. I just thought that was wild. We're just stopping by for a minute. And then we're going to go. But he said the 2 angels had an errand to run in a place called Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay. So they were literally on a call and headed to wipe out both of Sodom and Gomorrah. They were headed to wipe out the wickedness there. They stop, do a side story, a side arc, go to Abraham, and they're like, hey, we can't stay long. We're actually here for, we're stopping by. So you remember Lot, the dude that should have stayed home, that shouldn't have went with Abram? That's where he lives. He lives there. And these 2 angels are actually headed to bring out the wickedness, to kill all the wickedness, destroy it. Because nobody righteous could be found in that city. But Lot could be found. So in chapter 19, these 2 angels visit Lot, who lives there with his daughters. 2 of them were unmarried and were virgins. And these angels just chilled out in his home. And then the men of the cities surrounded the home and demanded that Lot let his guests come outside because they want to have sex with them. Could you imagine? So they didn't know they were angels. They thought they were men. So let's just understand that for a moment. This is supernatural. They thought they were men and they're angels, and they are surrounding the home, demanding, let them come out. We want to have sex with them. And so there's this extra biblical book called the Book of Jasher. I usually say Jasher. I think it's Jasher. In chapter 19, verse 3 of that book, it says, and by the desires of their 4 judges, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah had beds erected in the streets of the cities. And if a man came to these places, they laid hold of him and brought him to one of their beds, and by force, and forced him to lie in them. So these people are out here, I can't say it or I'll get, graping people. Y'all get what I'm saying? I don't want to get my video taken down. But they were out, that's what kind of crazy stuff was going on. And so they were just out there. The visitors spend the night. They say, the men say, we're just going to sleep out here in this common area. And Lot's like, not because he knew what the risk was. And to protect these visitors, Lot actually offers his virgin daughters to them instead. Lot's like, no, look. But they didn't want that because they wanted strange flesh. They were perverted. Do y'all get that? Do you get that? Okay, so the angels end up blinding the town people. This is wild. I'm telling you. The book of Genesis it's a riot, man. You just got to read it. So the angels blind the town people and then urge Lot and his family to run for the hills, basically. Like, get up out of here. Did Lot listen? No. Because the next day, Lot's still in the city the next morning with his family and had to be literally walked out of town by the two angels. So this is when they tell them to run for their lives and do not look back. And when they were gone, when they took off and the angels knew that they were going to be safe, fire and brimstone rained down and destroyed the towns. And we all know the story. Lot's wife looked back, turned. Lot and his daughters got saved. So the scene of Sodom and Gomorrah, it is not just about homosexuality. It is, but it was also about the open and public condoning of all of it. And then God came in and dealt with it. And he took care of it. So chapter 19 closes on an even like more strange things to us. Closes with the daughters of Lot getting their father drunk and becoming pregnant by him. And some Jewish rabbis believe that they thought the entire world had been destroyed. and so they didn't think that any man survived except their father. And so they were trying to populate the area and so they carried this out with their father. But the sons that came from this actually have a shameful history and were cursed. So, I don't know. Chapter 20, look, we are blazing through Genesis, and you are getting the fundamental, foundational truth of what this is, okay? Chapter 20 starts with Abraham making his wife lie again. Abraham, get it together. That she is his only sister again. All right, so Abimelech takes Sarah. This is the king. So this is basically take two of the same lie. God once again has to intervene and save Sarah. And he actually gives this king a dream that Sarah was in fact married and that God was going to kill him and his family if he touched her. God was not messing around. So this is a good example of why you need to take your dreams into account, of why your dreams are important. Because if this man had to just brush this off, his whole lineage would have been gone just like that. Because of someone else's lie. Do you get that? Do you get how someone else's lie can also, like, it doesn't just affect just you, it affects other people as well? Do you see that? So, this king starts tripping out. Could you imagine? This king starts tripping out, saying, "I did not touch her. I didn't do anything with her. I didn't come near her." And the man, he told me that they were brother and sister. Like, this is his sister, and she herself is my brother. And tell him, restore this man, his wife, for he is a prophet. So we see the Lord, this dude conversing with the Lord. And this is the first time that we actually see the Lord come in and call somebody a prophet. Up until right now, God is the only one who has been operating and with that label like a prophet. So the king, Abimelech, is like, why did you lie to me? Why did you do this to me? And Abraham says, I did it because I was scared. And this is where Abraham states, look, she is my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not of my mother. And then she became my wife. So Abraham's like, look, it's only half false. Like, only half of it. So we go into next. We have Isaac. In chapter 21, after 25 years of waiting, Isaac is born. Abraham is 100 years old, and Sarah is 90. And the promised son has been born. Sarah responds with great joy, and she is laughing because she was someone who was barren and now gave birth. So she was originally laughing in the context of mockery, of being like, this can't happen, to laughing in pure, like laughing from disbelief, and then laughing from just abundant joy. And so Isaac actually means laughter. So we have Isaac, and he continues to grow, and so does the tension between Sarah and Hagar, who had given birth to Abraham's first son, Ishmael. In Genesis 12, we see that there is one man and one woman joined together. And now we are seeing the discontent between multiple spouses and the disharmony there. And this is because polygamy is wrong. So we also have the continued disunity of brothers, just like Cain and Abel. Now we have Isaac and Ishmael, okay? So Sarah ends up not being able to handle the mockery. This is what I was saying earlier, where they put her out. She's being sent out. This is this part. Sarah ends up not being able to handle the mockery from Ishmael to Isaac. So you got to think, Ishmael is about 14, 15 of age. Isaac is probably around 2. So he's mocking Isaac, and God allows Sarah to send Ishmael and Hagar away. This is what I was saying earlier. This is that a little bit more in depth for you to understand. This does not mean that they were not loved by God, or Ishmael does not love God, because he was, even though he was not the permitted bloodline that would bring Jesus Christ, he would be taken care of and protected. Abraham sends Hagar and out to the desert with food and water. And so when this is when it was tore, when the separation of Ishmael and Isaac became a permanent state. They do get together again, but I'm meaning this is when it was just completely tore. They're just sent and separated, and this is where that started, where the true disharmony of these people groups. This is where the permanent separation of them started. So eventually, they're out in the wilderness, and they go through all their food and the water, and Hagar cries out to God to remember her son, because she's a mom, and she's like, I don't want my son to die out in the wilderness. And so the angel of the Lord appears. The Lord was taking care of him, and spoke to her from heaven, and he promised to care for her son and make him into a great nation, and then he provided a well for them to drink from. So a little side story of Ishmael. He grew up in the desert as a skilled archer. His descendants, he is Arab descendants. They look to Ishmael as their father. And this region in Saudi Arabia is the birthplace of Muhammad, who is a descendant of Ishmael and father of all Arabs. It is near the Muslim holy site, Mecca, where the reincarnate Jesus Christ visited them. And so this is the site of the well, is also a Muslim holy site called the Spring of Zamzam. Okay, so chapter 22 picks up later. When Isaac was likely a young man, we have the story of Abraham offering his son Isaac on the altar. Everybody knows this story, right? He tells them, like, in scripture, he tells them to go out. He has to sacrifice his son. And in scripture, there's something called the law of first mention. And this is the first place in Scripture where the word love appears. When God asked Abraham to do, is one of the greatest events in Abraham's life, and probably Isaac's. I'm pretty sure he remembered it. It is, it's a perfect prophetic picture. Say that 3 times. Perfect prophetic picture of the suffering Messiah. And so God is testing Abraham. And it is not so much a test to produce faith, it's a test to reveal the faith. Because so far throughout this time, chapter by chapter, brick by brick, year by year, Abraham was building himself, the Lord was building Abraham, and Abraham was building himself as a man of faith. So you have to understand that he is pretty solid in his faith right now. And so God comes in, and everything that he's saying could be just like a punch to the gut, really. Take now your son, your only son, whom you love, offer him there as a burnt offering. So during this time, the gods of Canaan demanded human sacrifices. So this was nothing extremely out there, but Abraham did believe that God was different. So there's probably a lot of confusion taking place to where God or Abraham's having to like contemplate, like, you know, like, I have faith in you. I know what you've told me. Like, this isn't totally strange for the gods of Canaan to be you know, but I thought you were different. You know, that could have been something that he would have been going through in his mind. So remember, God had already promised Abraham that he would have nations through his seed. He already said in Genesis 21, verse 12, in Isaac shall thy seed be called. So when he comes and says, offer your child to me, Abraham could have potentially thought he's just going to bring him back to life. Because look at everything God has already done to prove his promise to him. Why would he not just bring him back to life? So Abraham's immediate response is that he arose in the morning, saddled his donkey, took 2 of his young men that were workers with him and Isaac. His son split the offering and went to the plate. You know, he got the wood ready, took it to the place the Lord told him to go. And there was no partial disobedience now. Where in the beginning it might have been partial disobedience, there was none now. It was immediate 100% faithful obedience. And then God provides. We know the story that he provides, and he did not have to kill Isaac. The God provided a sacrifice. So in chapter 23, Sarah passes away. Sarah lived to be 127 years old, and she died in the land of Canaan. This is a couple that started together as unbelievers and ended in the land of Canaan. There was loss, there was grief, there was joy, there was anger, there was all these experiences. So they did not have a perfect marriage, but they were believers in God who were blessed by God. In chapter 24, Abraham is ready for Isaac to get a bride. He's like, it's time, you gotta get married. Abraham is determined that Isaac will marry a godly woman. He sends for his servant to get a bride for Isaac, and he was very adamant that his wife not be a Canaanite bride, because he wanted her to be a godly woman. He even makes the servant swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that he would do exactly what he said. So Abraham is believing that he's going to die. And so the demands that he's making to his servant, he's wanting them to be pretty clear. His servant goes out to find Isaac a bride among the Gentiles in Syria, and he takes 10 camels loaded with gifts. He's riding one, and then the other 9 is loaded down with gifts. And he finds Rebecca at a well, and she cares for the camel, and he presents her with earring and with bracelet, and he speaks to her and her father about Abraham and his son, and Rebecca is willing to leave her family to marry a man that she has never met before, that she's never even seen. And so Isaac is in the harvest field working and is at the well, and it's called Lahairoi, Lahairoi. I probably just destroyed that word. But it means living water. So he meets Rebecca, and then Isaac brings her into his mother's tent, and he took Rebecca, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mom's death. That's sweet. Isaac and Rebecca are now aligned to inherit. They're now positionally aligned. And, Sarah has passed. Abraham on his deathbed. And Isaac and Rebecca are conditioned now to inherit everything. Plot twist, Abraham doesn't die. He actually gets married again and has 6 more sons. It's before dying at the age of 175 years old. So, and Abraham gives all that he had to Isaac when he does die. In chapter 25, this is the only time Ishmael and Isaac get back together after their separation, and it's to bury their father. Isaac is about 75 years old, and Ishmael is close to 90. And Abraham is buried in the same cave where Sarah was buried 38 years earlier. So we are told some of Ishmael's sons to show that God did bless him, and he had provided. Even though he was not the son of the promise covenant from God, there are Arab names included among the descendants, which proves that he is a father of Arabs. We didn't learn that Ishmael. We then learned that Ishmael died at the age of 137, and his descendants lived in hostility with Isaac, a family feud that continues between Jews and the Arabs. So that's where all of it started, is right there. So this part in Genesis, there is a gear shift with Abraham and Sarah passed. Isaac and Rebecca are now married, and we have a shift to the birth of the twins of Rebecca and Isaac. Like Sarah, her mother-in-law, Rebecca was also barren, and through Isaac's prayer was able to conceive Esau and Jacob. Isaac only has 2 sons. When Rebecca was giving birth to the twins, they were struggling within the womb. The Lord says to her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from the bowels, and the people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. So the firstborn was Esau, and he came out red all over like a hairy garment. And after that, his brother was born, and it says that his hand took of Esau's heel as he was coming out. So the Hebrew word for Jacob is Yacov, Yaakov, and he was given this name at birth after he caught his brother's heel while emerging from Rebekah's womb. And Esau and Jacob are a set of 3 twins that are in the Bible. It's a pretty interesting fact. So side note, fun fact, Isaac does the same. We're in this chapter, and Isaac does the same thing his father does, that Abraham did. He now faces the same challenges that Abraham did. The king of the land wanting his wife, and he lied and said that she was his sister. Wonder where he learned that from. And so the king looks out a window and sees Isaac caressing Rebekah, and the king calls him in and was like, this king was ready. This king was like, so he's looking out a window. He sees Isaac caressing this woman. It's Rebekah. He calls him in, He's like, that's your wife, ain't it? That's your wife. I saw what you were doing. How dare you tell me that she's just your sister? And Isaac says, well, I thought I was going to die because of her, on account of her, and like, I didn't want to. And the king is like, why? What is this you've done to me? Like, one of the men could have had sex with your wife, and it would have brought guilt and sin upon us. Generational sin right there. That's what I see. So the birthright gave the firstborn son, the right of a double blessing. By selling his birthright, Esau sells it. He gives up the family blessing of the firstborn. So before they were born, Jacob, who was second born, was promised the birthright. His mother knew that, but they still chose to be deceitful. The Lord had already told her, we read it earlier, the elder will serve the younger. It was Jacob who was chosen by God. Esau is, I guess, what you would quote unquote say a man's man. He was an outdoorsman, liked to hunt, all that stuff. He was his father's favorite. And Jacob was a mama's boy who chose just to stay around the house and get petted by his mama, because that's what he liked. So Esau was entitled to this family birthright, but he came in hungry one day, and his brother Jacob apparently can make some really good porridge, because he's like, I got this right here. Do you want it? Give me your birthright. And so he sells his birthright for some food, which can show to us, did it really mean anything to him? Like, did it really, like, if he's that willing to give it away? So Isaac at this time has poor eyesight, and Rebekah encouraged Jacob to disguise himself to where he would feel and smell like Esau, so Isaac would bless him and get the birthright. It's like, could you imagine? They already said that Esau was like a hairy man, so he had to go in there like with hairy stuff all over him where you can feel him, because later he says like, you feel like Esau, but you sound like Jacob. Trickery. So later, after Esau had sold his birthright, and then Jacob got the blessing from the father. He tricked him. When Esau came home to receive the blessing, it was too late. Jacob had already got it. So that caused dissension between the two brothers, and Rebekah tells Jacob to run for his life because his brother intends to kill him, just as Cain and Abel. So Jacob goes to the region where his mother was raised to get away from his brother. Here began, hang on one second. So here's where it started, like dissension, and you could see what was going to cost them later because of this. There's countless lives throughout centuries. So Esau's descendants are the Amalekites, were the first enemies to obstruct the flight of Jacob's descendants from Egypt. And the Midianites even refused to let their uncle Jacob's children pass through their land. And it was Herod of Esau's race who had the male infants of Bethlehem slain in an effort to destroy Christ. So you can see where that started, like division amongst them. So Esau eventually marries yet another godless woman, a godless wife, if you read these in context. In addition to his other wives that he already had, who brought nothing but grief and despair to his parents, because Rebekah even says she is weary of her life because of the daughters of Heth, and these were Esau's wife. Esau also goes to Ishmael and marries one of his daughters. So chapter 28 is the story of Jacob's ladder, where you actually see heaven meeting, and it explains how there is a ladder to earth, and angels are ascending and descending on this, and there is an open heaven. So you have where we ended previously with the Tower of Babel, where they are trying to make it to heaven on their own by something they built. And here you have where God is saying God is doing it and God is showing him. So God's orchestrating it, and it's this divine connection of an open heaven, and he's able, and it just shows the angels ascending and descending on it. So Jacob ends up in this region where his mother was raised to get away from his brother Esau, and who the guy that was in charge was a relative, and Jacob was cheated by him again and again. So what you sow is what you reap, and he actually tricked who he was going to marry, who Jacob was going to marry. Laban is his name. He had 2 daughters, Leah and Rebecca, who Rachel was like 14, Leah, who was 14 years older, and Rachel, who was younger. And Rachel being younger is probably why she wasn't married yet. And it says that Leah, she wasn't married because her eyes were weak and dull looking. Probably because she had a really bad lazy eye. So Jacob worked for Laban 7 years to marry his daughter Rachel. And after 7 years of labor, on the wedding night, Laban switched Rachel and for his daughter Leah. And it gave Jacob a lesson of the rights of the firstborn, of the trickery, right? When he woke up and realized what happened to him, it was too late. He had already consummated everything with Leah. So he offered to work another 7 years for the bride he wanted and loved, and that was Rachel. So then he finally does get her. And so now we're going to transition to the 12 tribes of Israel. So the 12 sons, which would equal the 12 tribes of Israel, and at least 1 daughter were born to Jacob and his wives Leah and Rachel and their handmaids. So I'm going to show you. Here you go. So these are the sons you have, and it tells you in the order and who the mother was. So you have Reuben, Simon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, I can't say that, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. And those little names, those are the handmaids of Rachel and the handmaid of Leah. So these are their son, and they only had 1 daughter, and her name was Dinah. I'm going to pronounce it that way. It's Dinah, and that's the only daughter born to Jacob. And there's an event involving her in Genesis 34 that changes the course of the entire family for some. So Jacob goes back to the land. And when he finally, by this time, he goes back to the land where he originally came from, and he finally had to meet Esau. So it's the first time since he's had to run into him. And so he creates this ploy to keep from being murdered, and yet Esau welcomed him in, and they hugged and stuff. Esau, he is the founder of the city of Edom, which later became an enemy of Israel, the nation. In chapter 22, when Jacob wrestles with an angel, he is crippled for the rest of his life, and this is a life-changing moment for Jacob, because this man is the angel of the Lord with whom he's wrestling with, and until daybreak. That's a long time. And Jacob has been on the run all his life, and now with his hip permanently dislocated, he can never run again. And he has a limp, and he has to lean on others and on the Lord to be able to do anything. So his name changes from Jacob to Israel, and that means a prince or ruler with God. From this moment, the sons of Jacob were then called the children of Israel. And so the name Israel revealed in this story and has been maintained as the name of the Hebrew people and nation for more than 3,500 years. So from here on out in Scripture, you sometimes Jacob is called Jacob, and sometimes he's called Israel. Basically, if Jacob's in the flesh, he's called Jacob, and if Jacob's in the spirit, he's called Israel. And he was a conniving man. He cheated, and he got cheated time and time again. In chapter 34, the story of the sister of Dinah, this is the only chapter that presents a story about Jacob's daughter. And she's the sister of the 12 brothers, and she was wronged by the men of Shechem, Shechem. She was actually raped by Hamor's son, the prince of the country. So her brothers, Levi and Simon, in an attempt to, take care of business, and their sister, attempted to lure them and said, you can marry, because they were wanting to marry wives, but first you have to be circumcised. That's the rule of this. You have to be circumcised, and because nobody's going to marry their sister, unless they're circumcised. And so the men went, and all the men of the town went and got a circumcision. And on the third day after the circumcision, when the men were still in pain, Levi and Simon goes in and kills them all for avenging their sister. And but they did it so brutally that they forfeited their position in the line of rights. They didn't get land. And so after all of this, Jacob returned to Bethel, and Rachel died, giving birth to Benjamin. So I hope you can see this. This is a list of the 12 tribes of Israel. I did not make this. I put the link at the bottom, so I wanted to honor the man that did make this, because this is awesome. This is the 12 patriarchs, the 12 tribes. You have Judah, Reuben, Simon. You have Levi, Zebulun, Issachar, Dan, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Ephraim, Benjamin, Manasseh. So that can seem what I just named are two. Those seems what I named are 13 and not 12. But you have to remember, Levi didn't receive tribal territory like the other tribes. And also Joseph's sons, Joseph was a son, and Joseph's sons, they were considered heads of their own tribes, which was both of them received an inheritance of the land. So in some lists, Joseph is counted as the 12, and then in some lists, you have his sons labeled. So that's where that comes from. But you can see where the 12 territories, where they're at, how the kingdom, when it was united, when it was divided. Levi's blessing, instead of land, Levi, the tribe inherits responsibility for God's temple. Okay, so you have, let's go over these just a little bit. You have Judah, the tribe of kings, and the most preeminent of the 12 tribes in the big biblical narrative. Like, you have David, you have Jesus comes through this. Reuben, a descendant from Jacob's firstborn, whom Jacob said was as uncontrolled as water. The tribe chose not to settle in the promised land, and instead asked Moses for the territory that they conquered east of the Jordan River. You have Simon, the man Simon, with his brother Levi, slaughtered the men of an entire city to avenge his sister. The tribe's portion of land was within the midst of Judah's territory. However, Simon did not grow as rapidly as Judah and seems to have dispersed across multiple territories. You have Levi, the tribe of the priesthood. The tribe of Levi stood by Moses during the golden calf incident and Mount Sinai. You have Zebulon. Zebulon doesn't get very much attention in the Bible. The tribe, they have a strong, loyal fighting force during the days of the judges and King David. You have Issachar. Issachar has even less biblical presence than Zebulon, but the tribe was loyal to Deborah and Barak. You have the tribe of Dan. We don't read much about the man Dan, but we do see his tribe is up to no good in the book of Judges. You have the tribe of Gad, littlest set of Gad, the man or the tribe. They, like Reuben, settled east of the Jordan. You have Asher. Jacob prophesied that Asher's tribe would enjoy rich foods, and the tribe went on to possess a region of eastern Galilee, which is still known for its olive groves. You have Naphtali. Yes, what Zebulon is mentioned by the prophet Isaiah in a passage we read often during Christmas time. For a child will be born to us. This promise was given concerning the land of Galilee, specifically the land of Zebulon and the land of Naphtali. Ephraim, the tribe, is named after Joseph's son. Joseph received the birthright from Jacob, and instead of just one tribe, he is the ancestor of two. And after the kingdoms divided, you can see that the kingdoms divided on the picture. Yeah, the northern kingdom. Sorry, I'm looking at this too. So then you have Benjamin. This small tribe has played several important roles in Israel's history. Benjamin stood against the rest of Israel in a national civil war. You can read that in Judges. Saul, the first anointed king of Israel, was from the tribe of Benjamin. The tribe was also loyal to David's descendants when the northern tribe succeeded. You have King Saul, Mordecai, and Paul. Those are names that you would see that be related to Benjamin. So I thought this is just a pretty cool lineage thing, so you can see where the 12 tribes were. And we all know, like I kind of jumped in, Joseph is a son. I jumped right into the 12 tribes. But we all know Joseph was a son too. We all know the story of Joseph. Joseph was the favorite of the brothers, remember? And Joseph has a parallel type of him in Christ. He was the firstborn of Rachel. Therefore, he was favored by Jacob, and who gave him the famous coat of many colors. That's this Joseph. That's where you read this. And when Joseph was young, he has a dream, and then he foolishly goes out and tells his brother, and they already know he's a favorite. They get jealous of him, and then they plot out to get rid of him because they're jealous. Yeah, and so Joseph, they leave him in a pit. Joseph eventually ends up in Egypt, and because of his popularity, a young upstart, the brothers, this is when, they sold him into slavery. They took his coat, they put some lamb's blood on it, and took it back to Jacob, causing Jacob to believe that Joseph was dead. In a sense, they deceived Jacob the same way Jacob had deceived his father. Do you see like the generational stuff going on here? So Joseph was ended up taken as an Egyptian slave and served in Potiphar's house. Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him, but he refused her advances and fled. Insulted, she ends up spreading rumors about him to her husband. So he's thrown into prison for many years, and Joseph was probably confused, but he was still faithful to God. And then he has the dream. He has the butler has a dream, and the baker has a dream, and he interprets the dream, and they were correct. This is that Joseph. Joseph reveals to Pharaoh about the dreams about a famine. Pharaoh is impressed with his skills, and he comes all the way up and ends up being in his court. And so Joseph, he still, wasn't with his family at this time. At this time, they had a famine had overcome, and so they were basically, Joseph had that dream, and he told Pharaoh what to do, what was up, and his brothers end up coming in. They meet. They had to deal with Joseph. They figured that out. So I don't want to go too far into Joseph. I've already been on for a little over an hour, and I want to encourage you guys to go in and read the story of Joseph, because it is very vibrant and colorful, and you can just see the parallel of how he started out and where he ended up. And you can learn a lot of lessons on how, we're not always supposed to immediately just tell our dreams to people or our words to people, because that's, sometimes we got to do it on God's time, not our time. And so they end up being in Egypt for over 400 years. For about 30 years, they lived comfortably, but then Pharaoh came into power who did not know Joseph, and the Israelites are then put into bondage. And so we will eventually, next week, go into the next book after Genesis. So that was a lot. That was a foundational, the foundational truth of Genesis 12 through 15 now. You say, do I know Genesis? Yes, you do know Genesis now. And so I thank you for being here for this part. I love you guys. And we are going to call it for tonight. I encourage you to go in, if you have not read 12 through 50, read it. Read the story of Joseph. Dive in for yourself. There is so much stuff that has been left out that just can't fit into a single night's teaching on something, that can't fit into these 24 weeks. So I encourage you to jump in, read it yourself, go over it, deep dive, pull out all the books, do everything. Listen to this again if you need to. Read it, go along with this, whatever you need to do. Learn it more, understand it, let it soak in, and take root, everything. I will see you guys next week for week 4. Love you guys. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of our 24-week Bible Study Intensive. If you have any questions or comments, please drop them in the box below. If this episode blessed you and you would like to sow into our ministry, you can go to HODmantleforwar.com.